My ex mocked me for being alone until he saw who I was with. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman writing about revenge, but here I am, 3 months after the most humiliating night of my life, finally ready to tell this story. Not because I want sympathy, but because I want other women to know that sometimes the best response to cruelty isn't words. It's transformation. Let me start with the breakup itself, though calling it a breakup makes it sound mutual, civilized. What happened between Marcus and me was more like a public execution. We'd been together for 2 years. 2 years of what I thought was building something real. Shared apartments, visits, meeting each other's families, talking about the future in that careful way people do when they're testing whether their dreams align. I was 31, he was 34, and we both seemed ready for something serious. The signs were there, of course. They always are. Marcus had a way of making jokes at my expense that weren't quite jokes. He'd introduce me to his friends as Sarah, my girlfriend who thinks she's funnier than she actually is, or Sarah, who's convinced she's going to be the next big thing in graphic design. Always with a laugh, always as if it was playful teasing, but the sting lingered long after everyone else had moved on to other topics. I told myself it was just his sense of humor, that he was actually proud of me and just expressed it differently. I made excuses because I loved him, and because admitting that the person you love doesn't actually respect you is one of the hardest truths to face. The end came at Jake's birthday party. Jake being Marcus's best friend since college and consequently someone whose opinion Marcus valued more than mine. The party was at one of those trendy rooftop bars downtown, full of Marcus's graduate school friends and work colleagues. I knew most of them by then, had shared countless evenings with this same group, but I always felt like I was performing, trying to prove I belonged. I was talking to Emma, Jake's girlfriend, about a freelance project I'd just landed with a small but well-regarded tech startup. It wasn't huge money, but it was exactly the kind of creative work I'd been trying to break into for months. I was excited, maybe talking a little too enthusiastically about the project scope and the client's vision. "That sounds amazing, Sarah," Emma said genuinely. "You're so talented. I still have the logo you designed for my sister's boutique saved on my phone. I show it to everyone." I felt that warm flush of validation, the kind that comes from someone recognizing your work without you having to ask for it. That's when Marcus appeared beside us, already 3 drinks in based on the slight slur in his voice. "What are we celebrating?" he asked, sliding his arm around my waist in what might have looked affectionate to observers, but felt possessive to me. "Sarah just landed that project she was hoping for," Emma said brightly. "The one with the startup." Marcus's expression shifted in a way I'd learned to recognize. That micro moment when he decided whether to be supportive or cutting. "Oh, that," he said, and I already knew which way he'd chosen. "It's not really a big deal. It's like a 3-week project, right? Barely pays more than minimum wage when you break it down hourly." The dismissal hit me like cold water, but what came next was worse. "Besides," he continued, his voice getting louder as more people turned to listen, "Sarah's always excited about these little projects that she thinks will lead to something bigger. Remember the coffee shop logo? The yoga instructor's website? They never go anywhere." I felt my cheeks burning. "Marcus, that's not—" "I'm just being realistic, babe. You've been trying to make it as a freelancer for what? 2 years now. Maybe it's time to accept that it's a nice hobby, not a career." The group had gone quiet now, that uncomfortable silence that falls when someone crosses a line in public. I looked around and saw pity in some faces, awkwardness in others. Jake was staring at his beer, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "I think I need some air," I said quietly, already moving toward the exit. "See?" Marcus called after me, his voice carrying across the now silent rooftop. This is what I mean. She can't handle any criticism. How's she supposed to make it in business if she runs away every time someone tells her the truth? I kept walking, but I heard Emma's sharp, "Marcus, what the hell?" And Jake's muttered, "Dude, not cool." It didn't matter. The damage was done. I took the elevator down alone, my reflection in the polished doors showing a woman who looked exactly as small and defeated as I felt. I should have gone home. I should have ordered an Uber and spent the evening with ice cream and bad Netflix shows, licking my wounds in private. Instead, I went to the hotel bar across the street and ordered a glass of wine, telling myself I just needed a few minutes to collect myself before facing the world again. That's where Marcus found me 20 minutes later. "There you are," he said, sliding onto the bar stool next to me as if nothing had happened. "I was looking for you." "I'm sure you were." "Come on, Sarah, don't be dramatic. I was just joking around." I stared at him, this man I'd thought I loved, this man I'd been planning a future with, and saw him clearly for maybe the first time. "That wasn't joking, Marcus. That was humiliation." He sighed, the long-suffering sigh of someone dealing with an unreasonable person. "You're too sensitive. Everyone knows I support your little design projects." "My little design projects?" "You know what I mean. Look, I think you're talented, but you have to be realistic about your chances of actually making a living at this. I'm just trying to help you see that." Something crystallized in that moment, a clarity that cut through 2 years of gaslighting and diminishment. "You don't want to help me, Marcus. You want me to stay small so you can feel big." His face hardened. "That's ridiculous." "Is it? When's the last time you celebrated one of my successes without qualifying it? When's the last time you introduced me to someone new without some kind of backhanded comment about my work or my personality? I can't help it if you take everything as an insult." "I'm done," I said, standing up and placing a 20 on the bar. "I'm actually done." "Sarah, come on. Don't be like this." "Like what? Like someone who knows her worth?" I started to leave, but he grabbed my arm. Not hard, but firmly enough to stop me. "You think you know your worth? Sarah, be honest with yourself. You're 31 years old, you live in a studio apartment, and you're chasing a dream that's never going to pay your bills. Without me, what do you have?" The question hit me like a physical blow, not because it was true, but because it revealed how he really saw me. All this time, he'd been with someone he considered beneath him, someone whose only value was making him feel superior. "I guess we'll find out," I said, pulling my arm free. That should have been the end of it. A clean break, painful, but final. But Marcus wasn't done with me yet. The harassment started on social media first. Nothing overt enough to be called harassment, just public enough to be humiliating. Comments on my Instagram posts about my cute little hobby and how I was still trying to make fetch happen with my design career. Likes on other people's posts about successful couples with comments like, "Some people have it figured out." Clearly directed at me. When I blocked him on Instagram, he moved to Facebook. When I blocked him there, he started making comments to mutual friends that somehow always made their way back to me. I ran into Marcus at the gym. My friend Lisa told me after a yoga class. He asked about you. I hope you told him I was fine. I did, but then he said something weird. He said he hoped you were doing okay all alone, and that breakups are especially hard for people who don't have much else going for them. What does that even mean? I knew exactly what it meant. It meant Marcus was committed to a narrative where I was the pathetic ex-girlfriend, lost without him, desperately trying to make something of myself and failing. It meant he needed me to be miserable to validate his decision to leave. The worst part was how effective his campaign was. People started treating me differently, with that particular kind of careful kindness reserved for the recently dumped and potentially unstable. I'd walk into parties and conversations would stop, people unsure whether to acknowledge the elephant in the room or pretend everything was normal. "You're looking good," they'd say with surprise, as if they'd expected to find me in pajamas with unwashed hair. "How are you holding up?" They'd ask with concern, as if being single was a medical condition requiring monitoring. But the absolute lowest point came at Sarah Chen's engagement party 6 weeks after the breakup. Sarah was a college friend who'd stayed in touch with both Marcus and me, and she'd been in an impossible position since we split. She'd invited us both, probably hoping we could be civil for one evening. I almost didn't go. I'd spent the day working on a new project, actually a follow-up from that startup job Marcus had dismissed, which had led to 2 more clients. And I was tired. But Sarah had been such a good friend over the years, and I didn't want to let Marcus's presence dictate my choices. I chose my outfit carefully. A black dress that made me feel confident, heels that added 3 inches to my height, makeup that took 40 minutes to perfect. If I was going to face Marcus in public, I was going to look like someone who was thriving, even if I didn't entirely feel like it yet. The party was at Sarah's parents' house, a beautiful suburban home with a backyard perfect for entertaining. I arrived deliberately late, hoping to minimize the time I'd have to navigate the social minefield of shared friends post-breakup. I'd been there maybe 15 minutes, had gotten a drink and found a safe conversation with some college friends when I heard Marcus's laugh from across the yard. That loud, confident laugh that had once made me smile and now made my stomach clench with anxiety. I turned, more out of instinct than choice, and saw him holding court near the bar. He was with his new girlfriend. And yes, of course there was a new girlfriend already. She was younger than me, probably mid-20s, with the kind of effortless beauty that comes from never having doubted your place in the world. Her name was Jessica, and she worked at Marcus's consulting firm. And she was exactly the kind of woman who made his dismissive comments about my career seem prescient rather than cruel. I tried to focus on my conversation, but I was hyper-aware of Marcus's location, the volume of his voice, the way he was performing confidence like a peacock displaying feathers. Then I heard my name. Sarah? Oh, she's here somewhere, Marcus was saying, loud enough that it was clearly meant for me to overhear. Still trying to make it as a freelancer, last I heard. I keep waiting for her to realize it's not working out, but you know how it is when people get attached to unrealistic dreams. That's so sad, Jessica said, and I could hear the performative sympathy in her voice. It must be hard to watch someone you care about struggle like that. I tried to help her see reality when we were together, but she's stubborn. Some people need to learn things the hard way, I guess. I felt like I was going to be sick. Not just from the humiliation, but from the realization that this would be my life now. Marcus performing superiority at my expense while I tried to rebuild myself in the shadows of his judgment. That's when I saw Claire watching me from across the yard. Claire was Sarah's older sister, a successful attorney who'd always been kind to me but whom I didn't know well. She walked over with purpose, her expression concerned. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Because if you need an exit strategy, I'm happy to help." "I'm fine," I said automatically, then caught myself. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. This is humiliating." "He's being an ass," Claire said bluntly. "Everyone can see it, if that helps." "It doesn't really, because everyone can also see that he's right. I am here alone. I am struggling with my career. I am exactly the sad ex-girlfriend he's painting me as." Claire studied me for a moment. "You know what I see when I look at you?" "What?" "Someone who's brave enough to bet on herself. Someone who didn't settle for a relationship that made her smaller. Someone who's building something instead of tearing other people down." She paused. "That's not pathetic, Sarah. That's admirable." I felt tears prick my eyes. The first genuine kindness I'd received in weeks was almost harder to bear than the cruelty. But he's not wrong about the struggling part. So what? Everyone struggles. The difference is some people struggle while building something, and other people struggle while maintaining the status quo. Guess which one leads to actual growth? Claire's words stayed with me as I finally made my escape from the party. I didn't say goodbye to Sarah. I'd text her later with apologies and explanations. I didn't acknowledge Marcus or Jessica, though I felt their eyes on me as I walked to my car. But something had shifted that night. Maybe it was Claire's perspective, or maybe it was finally seeing Marcus's cruelty clearly reflected in other people's expressions. Whatever it was, I drove home with a strange sense of determination rather than defeat. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. I wrote down exactly what I wanted my life to look like in 6 months. Not the life I thought I should want. Not the life that would make Marcus's comments irrelevant, but the life I actually wanted. I wanted financial stability from work I loved. I wanted friendships based on mutual respect rather than shared history. I wanted to feel confident in my own skin, to walk into rooms without calculating whether I belonged there. I wanted to stop caring what Marcus thought about my choices. Most importantly, I wanted to remember what I'd been like before I spent 2 years shrinking myself to fit into his vision of who I should be. I started small. I joined a networking group for freelance designers and actually participated instead of just showing up. I took a weekend workshop on client relations and pricing strategies. I updated my portfolio website and raised my rates by 30%. The first few clients who balked at my new prices stung, but then I landed a project with a medium-sized nonprofit that paid more than I'd ever made for a single job. The client loved my work and referred me to 2 other organizations. Within a month, I had more work than I could handle alone. I started saying no to social events where I'd have to perform doing well for people who were more interested in the drama than my actual well-being. Instead, I said yes to things that scared me: a public speaking workshop, a gallery opening where I knew no one, a hiking group that met every Saturday morning. Slowly, I started to remember who I was when I wasn't constantly defending myself or trying to prove my worth. I was funny. Actually funny, not just trying to be. I was curious about people and ideas. I had opinions about things beyond my relationship status. I was building something. 3 months after that disastrous engagement party, I got an email that changed everything. The subject line read, "Potential collaboration, Hartwell and Associates." Hartwell and Associates was one of the most prestigious design firms in the city, the kind of place I'd dreamed of working but never thought I was qualified for. The email was from Daniel Hartwell himself, the founder, asking if I'd be interested in discussing a partnership on a major rebranding project. "I've been following your work," he wrote, "particularly the campaign you did for Green Future nonprofit. I'm impressed by your strategic thinking and execution. I think you'd be perfect for a project I have in mind." I read the email 3 times before it sank in. Daniel Hartwell knew my work. Daniel Hartwell wanted to work with me. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday at their downtown office. I spent the weekend researching the firm, preparing questions, and trying on every combination of clothes I owned. This wasn't just about the project, though the project would be career-defining. This was about proving to myself that I could operate at this level. Daniel turned out to be exactly the kind of person I'd hoped to work with. Brilliant, demanding, but respectful. He treated me like a peer, asking for my thoughts on strategy and implementation, challenging my ideas in ways that made them stronger rather than dismissing them outright. "I've been watching the freelance scene in this city for years," he said as we wrapped up our 2-hour meeting. "And most of the independent designers are either technically skilled but strategically naive, or strategically sound but creatively limited. You're the first person I've met who brings both elements together." The project was a complete brand overhaul for a major tech company. 6 months of work, a fee that was more than I'd made in the past year combined, and the kind of portfolio piece that would establish me as a serious player in the industry. "There's one more thing," Daniel said as I gathered my portfolio. "Part of this project involves presenting to the client's board, including their investors. It's a high-visibility situation, and frankly, that's often where freelancers struggle. They do great work but can't sell it in the room where it matters." "I understand. I don't think that's going to be a problem for you, but I wanted to be transparent about expectations. This isn't just about deliverables. It's about being able to stand behind your work with confidence." I left that meeting walking on air, not just because of the opportunity, but because someone of Daniel's caliber saw me as capable of handling it. For the first time since the breakup, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few weeks were a blur of research, strategy sessions, and creative development. I was working harder than I'd ever worked, but it felt different than the desperate scrambling I'd done before. This felt purposeful, building towards something significant. Daniel and I developed a good working relationship quickly. He pushed me to think bigger, to consider implications I hadn't seen, to defend my choices with evidence rather than instinct. It was exactly the kind of professional growth I'd been craving. 3 weeks into the project, he asked if I'd join him for a client dinner. "It's not directly related to our project," he explained, "but it would be good for you to meet some people in the industry. Plus, I could use an intelligent conversation partner. These events can be deadly dull." The dinner was at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, the kind of place I'd walked past hundreds of times but never imagined entering. I chose my outfit carefully, professional but not boring, confident but not trying too hard. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in rooms like this. Daniel met me at the bar, and I was struck again by how comfortable I felt around him. He was probably 15 years older than me, successful enough that he could afford to be generous with opportunities, and secure enough in his own reputation that my presence reflected well on his judgment rather than threatening it. "You look lovely," he said, and it felt like a genuine compliment rather than an evaluation. "Thank you, and thank you again for including me tonight. I know this isn't directly work-related." "Actually, I have an ulterior motive," he said with a slight smile. "I'm hoping some of these people will steal you away from me eventually. You're too talented to stay freelance forever, and I'd rather be known as the person who helped launch your career than the person who held you back." It was exactly the kind of support I'd never gotten from Marcus. Someone who saw my success as reflecting well on both of us, rather than as a threat to his own importance. We spent the first hour of the evening talking with various industry people, and I found myself relaxing into conversations instead of performing in them. These were people who were interested in ideas, in creative solutions, in the work itself rather than the personalities behind it. I was deep in a discussion about user experience design with the UX director from a major firm when I heard a familiar laugh from across the room. My blood turned to ice water. Marcus was here. Not just Marcus and Jessica, both dressed up and clearly out of their element but trying to fake belonging. I later learned that Jake had gotten a job at one of the firms represented at the dinner and had brought them as his guests. I saw the moment Marcus spotted me. His expression went through a visible transformation. Surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like panic. I was supposed to be at home alone, struggling with my little design projects. I wasn't supposed to be at exclusive industry events, dressed like I belonged, talking to people who treated me as an equal. He started making his way across the room toward me, Jessica trailing behind with an expression of curiosity. I felt my old anxiety spike, the familiar dread of having to endure his performance of superiority in front of new people. That's when Daniel appeared at my elbow. "Sarah, I want you to meet Michael Chen from Innovate Corp. He's the CEO of the company we're rebranding. Michael, this is Sarah Williams, the brilliant designer I've been telling you about." Michael Chen extended his hand with the kind of focused attention that comes from genuine interest. "Sarah, it's wonderful to meet you. Daniel's been raving about your strategic approach to our project. I have to admit, I was skeptical about working with an independent designer, but your preliminary concepts have completely changed my mind." I shook his hand, hyper-aware that Marcus had stopped about 10 feet away and was clearly listening. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. I'm excited about the project. Daniel's been an incredible collaborator." "Please call me Michael, and I hope Daniel's paying you what you're worth. Talent like yours shouldn't come cheap." It was exactly the kind of validation I'd dreamed of, and it was happening in front of the person who'd spent months telling me I'd never amount to anything professionally. Daniel laughed. "Sarah drives a hard bargain. Don't worry. She's teaching me that good work costs good money." "As it should," Michael said. "Sarah, Daniel tells me you'll be presenting to our board next month. I'm looking forward to seeing your recommendations." "I'm looking forward to sharing them." As Michael moved on to other conversations, I became aware of Marcus hovering nearby, clearly trying to figure out how to insert himself into the situation. The old me would have felt obligated to acknowledge him, to smooth over the social awkwardness. The new me felt no such obligation. "Friend of yours?" Daniel asked quietly, having noticed Marcus's hovering. "Ex-boyfriend," I said simply. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Not protective exactly, but more attentive. Ah, the kind who made you question your own capabilities? I looked at him sharply. It was such a precise assessment that it took me off guard. That obvious? Not obvious, but I've been in this business long enough to recognize talented people who don't quite believe in their own talent yet. It usually comes from someone important not believing in them first. Before I could respond, Marcus finally made his move. Sarah, he said with exaggerated friendliness, approaching with Jessica in tow. I can't believe you're here. This is such a surprise. Hello, Marcus, I said evenly. You look different, he said, and I could see him trying to process the version of me standing in front of him. I mean, good. You look good. Thank you. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Marcus clearly expected me to explain my presence, to introduce Daniel, to somehow account for how I'd ended up at an event like this. I didn't. Finally, Marcus gestured to Jessica. This is Jessica, my girlfriend. Jessica, this is Sarah, my ex. Jessica smiled with the kind of polite warmth that suggested she'd heard stories. Hi, Sarah. It's nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, too. Another silence. Marcus was clearly flustered by my lack of explanation or small talk. So, he said, his voice taking on the slightly patronizing tone I remembered too well. What brings you to something like this? Did you come with someone? It was such a perfectly Marcus question, designed to establish that I didn't belong, that I must be someone's plus one rather than an invited participant. Daniel stepped forward smoothly. Actually, Sarah's here as my colleague. We're working on a major rebranding project together. He extended his hand to Marcus. Daniel Hartwell and Associates. I watched Marcus's face go through another transformation as he processed this information. Daniel Hartwell was a name he'd know. Everyone in business in this city knew Daniel Hartwell. Marcus Peterson, he said, shaking Daniel's hand. I work at Morrison Consulting. Ah, yes, good firm. Daniel's tone was polite but distant, the way successful people acknowledge competent but unremarkable peers. So you're working together, Marcus said, his tone suggesting this was somehow surprising or suspicious. Sarah's been incredible, Daniel said warmly. One of the most strategic thinkers I've worked with in years. The client is thrilled with her approach. I watched Marcus struggle with this information. In his narrative, I was supposed to be failing, struggling, proving that his assessment of my capabilities had been correct. Instead, I was succeeding at a level he couldn't dismiss or diminish. That's great, he said finally. I always knew Sarah was creative. Creative? Yes. But more importantly, she's strategic. She understands business in a way that most designers don't. Daniel's praise felt genuine, not performed for Marcus's benefit, which somehow made it more devastating to my ex's worldview. Well, Marcus said, clearly ready to escape the conversation. We should let you get back to your evening. It was good to see you, Sarah. You seem to be doing well. The phrase, seem to be doing well, was classic Marcus, acknowledging the surface appearance while implying doubt about the reality underneath. I am doing well, I said simply. Really well. As they walked away, I heard Jessica ask, who was that man she was with? And Marcus's response, some designer, I think. Probably just networking. Daniel, who'd obviously heard the exchange, shook his head slightly. Some people can't imagine others succeeding beyond their expectations. He spent our entire relationship telling me I needed to be more realistic about my career goals. And now you're working at a level he probably couldn't achieve in his field if he tried for 20 years. It wasn't just the professional validation that felt so powerful, though that was certainly part of it. It was being seen clearly by someone who valued what Marcus had tried to diminish. It was standing in a room full of successful people and feeling like I belonged there, not because I was performing belonging, but because I actually did belong there. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of good conversations and growing confidence. Daniel introduced me to several other people who expressed interest in my work, and I found myself booking follow-up meetings for potential projects. By the time we said goodbye at the valet stand, I felt like a different person than the one who'd walked into that restaurant 3 hours earlier. "Thank you," I said as we waited for our cars. "Not just for tonight, but for everything. This opportunity has changed my life." "You changed your life," Daniel corrected. "I just gave you a platform to show what you could do. And Sarah? This is just the beginning. You have no idea how far you can go." Driving home that night, I thought about the look on Marcus's face when he realized I was there as a professional equal, not a desperate ex-girlfriend trying to network her way into relevance. I thought about Jessica's surprised expression when she realized the struggling artist she'd probably heard about was actually thriving in ways Marcus never had. But mostly, I thought about how good it felt to be seen accurately by someone who mattered. To have my work valued, my potential recognized, my presence welcomed, not as a charity case or a pity invite, but as someone who brought value to the table. The project with Daniel's firm became the launching pad for everything that followed. The board presentation went beautifully. Michael Chen later told colleagues that my strategic recommendations had exceeded their highest expectations. Within 2 months, I had 3 major clients and a waitlist for new projects. 6 months after that humiliating engagement party, I was invited to speak at the city's biggest design conference. The topic was building a successful freelance practice, and I spoke to a room of 300 people about the journey from self-doubt to self-advocacy. Marcus was in the audience. I saw him about halfway through my presentation, sitting toward the back with a confused expression, as if he couldn't quite reconcile the confident woman on stage with the person he'd spent months describing as delusional about her own capabilities. After my talk, during the networking reception, he approached me again. "Sarah, that was impressive," he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he seemed genuinely uncertain. "I had no idea you were doing so well." "Thank you," I said simply. "I mean, when we broke up, you were struggling so much with the freelance thing. It seemed like you were never going to make it work." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never seen before. Insecurity. The realization that his assessment of my potential had been not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. That his dismissal of my dreams had said more about his limitations than mine. I was struggling, I agreed, but I was also learning. I guess I misjudged the situation. It was as close to an apology as I was going to get, and honestly, closer than I'd expected. "We both learned things," I said diplomatically. "Are you seeing anyone now?" The question came out awkwardly, as if he couldn't quite believe he was asking it. "I'm seeing a lot of people," I said with a smile. "Clients, collaborators, friends. I'm building a life I love." He nodded, looking lost. "That's good. That's really good." As he walked away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not the self-congratulatory kind that comes from seeing someone get their comeuppance, but genuine sadness for someone who'd been so committed to a narrative of my inadequacy that he'd missed the chance to celebrate my growth. But more than pity, I felt gratitude. Not for his cruelty, that I could have done without, but for the clarity it had ultimately provided. His dismissal of my dreams had forced me to examine whether I believed in them myself. His mockery of my solitude had pushed me to build a life so full and meaningful that being alone was a choice rather than a circumstance. A year after that conference, Daniel offered me a partnership in his firm. Not a job, a partnership. Equal equity, equal say in major decisions, my name on the door. "I've never had a partner before," he told me over dinner as we celebrated the signed papers. "I was always too controlling, too convinced I could do everything better myself. But working with you taught me that the right collaboration doesn't diminish your capabilities. It expands them." I thought about Marcus's need to diminish me to feel successful, and how different it felt to be with someone who saw my success as expanding rather than threatening his own. "To new partnerships," I said, raising my glass. "To new partnerships," he agreed. 2 years after Marcus had asked me, "Without me, what do you have?" I could finally answer that question with complete confidence. Everything. I had work that challenged and fulfilled me, relationships built on mutual respect rather than need, financial security I'd earned through my own efforts, and most importantly, an unshakable sense of my own worth. I had learned that the cruelest thing someone can do isn't to leave you. It's to try to convince you that you're nothing without them. And the most powerful thing you can do in response isn't to argue with their assessment, but to prove them wrong through the simple act of becoming who you were always capable of being. Marcus had mocked me for being alone, thinking that solitude was evidence of failure. He hadn't understood that sometimes you need to be alone to remember who you are when you're not constantly defending your worth to someone who refuses to see it. I wasn't alone anymore. I was surrounded by people who valued my contributions, celebrated my successes, and supported my continued growth. But more importantly, I was no longer afraid of being alone, because I'd learned that my worth didn't depend on external validation. Sometimes I still see Marcus around the city. It's a small professional community in many ways. He's polite now, even respectful, as if he's trying to rewrite the history of how he treated me. But I don't need his revision of our story. I have my own story now. One where his opinion of my potential was just one voice among many, and far from the most important one. The most important voice I learned was my own. And once I started listening to it, really listening, everything else became possible.